In 2013, Microsoft made a mistake so catastrophic it handed Sony the entire generation. This is the complete story of how PlayStation 4 won the console war. The 8th generation of consoles began with one of the most spectacular corporate disasters in gaming history. On May 2013, Microsoft gathered game and press industry analysts and Xbox fans at their Edmond campus for what should have been a triumphant moment. Instead, they delivered a presentation so tone-deaf and anti-consumer that it would define their struggles for the entire generation. The first red flag came with the event's focus. Rather than leading with games, Microsoft spent the majority of their hour-long presentation discussing television integration, NFL partnerships, and Skype functionality.
TV, TV and movies, TV, Xbox, watch TV, 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 watch TV, TV, TV and TV remote, TV experience, TV, 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 sports TV, TV, TV. Anybody?
Don Mattrick, then president of interactive entertainment business, seemed more interested in positioning Xbox One as an entertainment system rather than a gaming console. Even when announcing the Xbox One, he called it the new entertainment system.
Today, we're thrilled to unveil the ultimate all-in-one home entertainment system. The one with the power to create experiences that look and feel like nothing else. The one that makes your TV more intelligent. The one system for a new generation. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Xbox One.
Throughout the presentation, they reinforced the idea that this console was more about the TV aspect of it rather than the gaming. But the presentation was just the beginning. In the days and weeks following the reveal, Microsoft's executives seemed determined to alienate every potential consumer. The DRM situation was equally dystopian. Microsoft initially planned to require players to log into the console and connect it to the internet every 24 hours to verify game licenses. For those who may not have access to an internet connection, the console became pointless. It also affected used games. Games would now be tied to one account, which restricted sharing and selling games, something that has always been a fundamental part of console gaming. This affected game stores too. GameStop saw a drop in the stock prices after the announcement went live. For many people, this left a truly sour taste in their mouths. Microsoft later walked back some of these restrictions, but the damage to trust was irreparable. Adam Orff's Twitter meltdown became the face of Microsoft's arrogance. When questioned about always online requirements, the Xbox executive suggested critics should deal with it and compared internet outages to electricity going out, ignoring that consoles had worked without internet for decades. His deal with it hashtag was just a sign of how tone-deaf Xbox were at this time. Don Mattrick's response was somehow even worse though. When asked about customers without reliable internet access, he suggested they should stick with the Xbox 360, essentially telling a significant portion of their potential market that they weren't welcome on the new platform.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message. If you don't, like it.
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean, seriously.
I mean, that sure is a great way to attract people to buy your new console. The $499 price point felt like the final insult though.
That Xbox One will launch this November in 21 markets around the world at $499 in the US and 499 euros in European markets and 429 pounds in the UK.
That $100 increase over the PlayStation 4 wasn't about buying better hardware, it was actually quite the opposite. It was more about funding the mandatory Kinect sensor that many people didn't want anyway. Microsoft had made Kinect a necessity that no one wanted. Then, 3 weeks later, Sony took the stage at E3 2013 and delivered one of the most devastating counterattacks. Everything about their presentation was calculated to exploit Microsoft's wounds while positioning PlayStation as the gamer-friendly alternative. The brilliance began with their brief official PlayStation used game instructional video, which quickly became a viral sensation. PlayStation demonstrated the complex process of sharing their games. Yoshida handed a disc to Boyce, who said, "Thanks."
Thanks.
PlayStation.
The 22-second video gained millions of views and perfectly captured the absurdity of Microsoft's restrictions through simple contrast. Then came Andrew Houser's presentation, which was a masterclass in timing and messaging. Rather than spending time attacking Microsoft directly, Sony simply stated their policies. PlayStation 4 games would work offline, wouldn't require internet check-ins, and wouldn't restrict used game sales. Each statement received applause as the audience quickly realised Sony was systematically dismantling every Xbox One complaint, whilst also making Xbox look completely stupid because of those decisions.
Equally focused on delivering what gamers want most, without imposing restrictions or devaluing their PS4 purchases. For instance, PlayStation 4 won't impose any new restrictions on the use of PS4 gamers. PlayStation 4 disc-based games don't need to be connected online to play. Or for any type of authentication. If you enjoy playing single-player games offline, PS4 won't require you to check in online periodically. And it won't stop working if you haven't authenticated within 24 hours.
The $399 price announcement was the final nail in the coffin. Once the price was revealed, the crowd erupted. The reaction was so immediate and sustained that House had to wait for the cheers to die down before continuing, and in that moment, Sony had positioned themselves as the main console a gamer should buy.
And will continue to offer the best value on the market. I'm very proud to announce that PlayStation 4 will be available at $399. €399, and for the folks in my homeland, £349 sterling.
The PS4 was everything the Xbox wasn't. Xbox in a way handed the win to Sony themselves by delivering such a tone-deaf presentation. All that Sony had to do was simply use those mistakes as their main marketing campaign, and that's exactly what they did. Sony's aggressive positioning at E3 was particularly powerful because it came from a company that had nearly destroyed their own gaming division just a generation earlier. The PlayStation 3 launch had been a disaster class that rivaled the Xbox One's mistakes. The PS3 launched in November 2006 at $499 for the 20GB model and $599 for the 60GB version. The PlayStation 3 was priced out of reach for most people. Ken Kutaraga's infamous quote where he said that consumers would work extra hours to afford a PS3 felt tone deaf. The PlayStation Network just wasn't as good when compared to Xbox Live's integrated online experience either. Sony's late entry into online gaming left them scrambling to match Microsoft's infrastructure, resulting in a service that felt stitched together rather than designed. The catastrophic 2011 PSN hack, which exposed millions of customer records and shut down the server 23 days, represented the rock bottom of Sony's online efforts. By 2010, the PlayStation 3 had sold around 40 million units compared to Xbox 360's 50 million, and the Nintendo Wii sold around 70. For a company that dominated the previous two console generations with the PlayStation and PlayStation 2, this represented an existential crisis. The PlayStation brand had become associated with expensive hardware, difficult development, and corporate arrogance. Sony Computer Entertainment underwent massive internal changes following the PS3's struggles. Kaz Hirai's promotion to CEO brought a more humble, gamer-focused approach. The hiring of Mark Cerny as lead architect for PlayStation 4 signalled Sony's commitment to developer-friendly hardware. Jack Tretton's increased prominence in marketing represented a shift toward more authentic, passionate communication with gaming communities. PlayStation 4's victory wasn't built solely on Microsoft's mistakes, although there is no denying that Xbox shot themselves in the foot and definitely helped Sony. It also wouldn't be fair to say that Sony didn't earn their success with the PS4. Through superior strategy, execution, and an unwavering focus on what gamers actually wanted, the PS4 was just the more appealing choice. From 2013 to 2020, Sony executed one of the most dominant console generations in gaming history, establishing advantages in hardware, software, developer relations, and market positioning that would define the entire generation. The fundamental difference between PlayStation 4 and Xbox One is that they represented two entirely different visions of what a gaming console should be. Microsoft's approach prioritised the living room experience, viewing gaming as one component of a broader entertainment ecosystem. Sony's approach prioritised the development experience, viewing everything else as secondary to creating the best possible gaming machine. Mark Cerny's role as PlayStation 4's lead architect was crucial to this philosophy. He brought decades of game development experience to the project. His resume included classics like Marble Madness, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Crash Bandicoot, and Jak and Daxter. When he spoke about hardware requirements, he understood the practical realities of game development in ways that traditional engineers couldn't. Cerny's development process was unprecedented in console history. Rather than designing hardware in isolation and expecting developers to adapt the way other game consoles were made, he spent over 2 years conducting interviews with major studios worldwide. He asked detailed questions about memory bandwidth, GPU compute units, storage requirements, and development tool preferences. The PlayStation 4's architecture reflected direct feedback from the developers who would ultimately create its software library. The technical specifications told a clear story. PlayStation 4's AMD APU included 8 CPU cores running at 1.6 GHz, but more importantly it featured 18 compute units in its GPU compared to Xbox One's 12. The memory configuration was even more significant. 8GB of GDDR5 RAM with 176GB of bandwidth completely outclassed Xbox One's complex combination of 8GB DDR3 RAM plus 32MB of ESRAM. These differences translated to real-world performance advantages. The Xbox One's memory architecture required developers to manually manage between slow DDR3 and fast ESRAM, adding complexity that many studios struggled with throughout the generation. PlayStation 4's unified memory pool allowed developers to focus on creating games rather than wrestling with hardware limitations. The PlayStation 4's hardware was remarkable, and it's easy to look back and say that graphics peaked towards the end of its life cycle. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us Part 2 looked and still do look incredible, and it shows just how powerful the console truly was. However, the one thing that I believe truly defined the generation of PlayStation and the PlayStation 4 was its exclusive titles. The generation began with The Last of Us, although that is a PS3 game, but it was remastered for the PlayStation 4's launch window. Naughty Dog's masterpiece had already established new standards for storytelling and games, but its PlayStation 4 version became a system seller that demonstrated Sony's commitment to mature, narrative-driven experiences. The Last of Us succeeded because it treated its zombies apocalypse setting with unprecedented seriousness and emotional weight. Joel and Ellie's relationship felt authentic because it was built on shared trauma, and there is no surprise that the game has been remastered one too many times. The God of War reboot represented perhaps the most successful franchise reboot in game in history. Santa Monica Studio took Kratos, a character defined by rage and vengeance, and transformed him into a more complex father figure struggling with his past while trying to be a better parent than his own father was. The technical achievement was staggering. The entire game was presented as a single continuous shot without traditional loading screens or cuts, which created unprecedented immersion. The combat system perfectly balanced accessibility and depth. The Leviathan axe was a lot of fun to use, with throwing and recall mechanics that felt both powerful and precise. The axe's connection to Norse mythology, its contrast with Kratos' traditional blaze of chaos, and its role in environmental puzzles made it central to both gameplay and narrative. The relationship between Kratos and Atreus drove every aspect of the game. Their conversations revealed character development naturally. Atreus' archery was useful, but it mainly reinforced his growth throughout the game. The tension between Kratos and Atreus was the emotional anchor of the game, and it delivered what I believe to be the best game of the PS4 generation. Naughty Dog's Uncharted 4: A Thief's End served as Nathan Drake's farewell while showcasing everything the studio had learned about character development, technical achievement, and interactive storytelling. From Software's Bloodborne brought the punishing design philosophy of Dark Souls to a gothic horror setting that felt distinctly PlayStation. The game's faster-paced combat and cosmic horror themes attracted both Souls-like fans and new players, creating a cult following that continues to demand a sequel. The transformation from medieval fantasy to Victorian Gothic allowed From Software to develop different gameplay mechanics while maintaining the core design principles. The rally system encouraged a more aggressive playstyle by allowing players to regain lost health. The absence of shields forced players to rely on dodging and parrying, creating more dynamic combat encounters. Bloodborne has definitely gone down as one of the PlayStation 4's best games. Insomniac's Spider-Man finally delivered a Spider-Man game that fans had dreamed of for decades. The game succeeded by focusing on what makes Spider-Man unique: web-swinging traversal, quick-witted humour, and the balance between Peter Parker's personal life and superhero responsibilities. The web-swinging mechanics were the game's defining feature through the combination of physics-based movement and accessible controls. You would simply hold R2 to swing automatically, but mastering point launchers, dive bombs, and wall running created a flow state that perfectly captured the fantasy of being Spider-Man. The decision to require actual anchor points for webs, rather than invisible skyhooks, made movement feel grounded in the game's realistic New York City. The story also balanced multiple villains and plot lines while maintaining focus on Peter Parker's character development. Combat combined Batman Arkham-style counter-based fighting with uniquely Spider-Man elements like web attacks, environmental interactions, and vertical movement. The gadgets also added some core options that worked well when combined together. Sony's exclusive strategy succeeded because it embraced diversity of experiences rather than pursuing a single formula. These games represented different genres. This diversity meant that PlayStation 4 offered exclusive experiences for almost every gaming preference. Players who enjoyed the challenging gameplay had Bloodborne, those who preferred narrative experiences had The Last of Us and God of War, and open world fans had Horizon Zero Dawn and the Spider-Man game. The quality of these games and the consistency was equally important. Every major PlayStation exclusive during this generation achieved critical acclaim and commercial success. Metacritic scores consistently ranged from the high 80s to mid 90s, establishing PlayStation as a platform where exclusives meant excellent. And that is also the reason as to why the PS5 and its lack of exclusives has become a problem for this generation's console. The PS4 set such a high standard with its exclusive game catalogue, and the PS5 simply hasn't been able to replicate it. Victory, however, wasn't without its complications and blind spots. Sony's dominance during the PlayStation 4 generation didn't prevent them from making their own missteps that could have derailed their success. Sony's approach to backward compatibility during the PS4 generation wasn't exactly consumer friendly. Microsoft made original Xbox and Xbox 360 games playable on Xbox One through impressive engineering and consumer-friendly policies. Sony relegated PlayStation's 30-year software library to a poorly executed streaming service. PlayStation Now launched a Sony solution to that problem, but the service felt designed more for Sony's business interests than consumer needs. The subscription model meant that players could stream older PlayStation titles. The streaming technology required high-speed internet connections that many people simply didn't have access to, which meant that they couldn't use the service even if they wanted to. Input lag also made games feel horrible and unresponsive to play. The game catalogue itself also wasn't great. Major PlayStation exclusives were often missing, and most of the game on offer weren't something anyone was interested in. Xbox One players could put in the Xbox 360 discs and play enhanced version of classic games at no additional cost. The feature was presented as a celebration of Xbox gaming heritage rather than a revenue opportunity. Phil Spencer's ascension to head of Xbox marked a fundamental culture shift that would position Microsoft for long-term success, at least that's what it seemed like. Xbox Game Pass launched in 2017 and represented the most significant innovation in gaming distribution since probably digital downloads. The Netflix for games model provided incredible value. For $9.99 monthly and later $14.99 for Game Pass Ultimate, subscribers gained access to over 100 games, including day one access to all Microsoft first-party releases. The math was simple. Game Pass cost less than a single new game but provided access to hundreds of titles. More importantly, Game Pass changed gaming behaviour in positive ways. Players were more likely to try games outside their usual preferences, leading to discoveries they may never have made. The day one inclusion of major exclusives like Forza, Gears of War, Halo and many others proved immediate justification for subscription costs while demonstrating Microsoft's commitment to the service. Unlike Sony's approach to selling exclusives at premium prices, Microsoft was training consumers to view their major releases as service benefits rather than individual purchases. The service's success attracted third-party publishers who saw Game Pass as a way to extend the profitable lifespan of older games while generating revenue from titles that had exhausted their traditional sales potential. Publishers could earn guaranteed payments for Game Pass inclusion while potentially discovering new audiences for the franchises. Microsoft's aggressive studio acquisition strategy represented a long-term investment in exclusive content that acknowledged their first-party weakness during the Xbox One generation. The Bethesda acquisition for $7.5 billion was particularly significant. bringing established franchises like The Elder Scrolls, Fallout and Doom under Microsoft's umbrella, while adding respected development talent across multiple studios. The deal signalled that Microsoft was willing to make substantial investments to compete with Sony's first-party advantages. These acquisitions were structured to preserve creative independence while providing financial security. Studios maintain their cultural identities and development philosophies while gaining access to Microsoft's resources and technology. The approach suggested that Microsoft had learned from previous integration failures that had damaged acquired talent. The PlayStation 4's triumph over Xbox One was decisive, a generation-defining victory that left no doubt about the winner. Unlike the 7th generation's complex split between Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, the 8th generation had a clear champion and obvious explanations for their success. Sony achieved this dominance through a perfect storm of factors that may never align again. Microsoft's catastrophic Xbox One reveal created an opening that Sony exploited. PlayStation 4's superior hardware delivered immediate, measurable advantages over the Xbox One. The exclusive titles represent the culmination of decades of first-party investment, with multiple studios simultaneously reaching creative peaks that produced generation-defining experiences. The 8th generation of consoles will be remembered as the last console war. Xbox has all but given up and surrendered itself to PlayStation, with Xbox exclusive titles now making their way onto the PS5. Something that would seem absolutely absurd 10 years ago. Game Pass has gone from being one of the best deals in gaming to now looking like an absolute rip-off. That isn't worth the money. Xbox is at an all-time low, and the lack of competition is maybe why the PS5 is struggling too. Sony feel like they don't really need to do anything to win consumers over anymore. And that's a shame, because the big reason of why the PS4 was such a great console was that it was always trying to be better than the Xbox. Competition is needed, and maybe one day Xbox can rebuild itself to what it once was back in its 360 days. The PlayStation 4 succeeded because it perfectly embodied what a gaming console should be. The PlayStation 4 won the last traditional console war by being the best traditional gaming console, and in my opinion, the PlayStation 4 is the greatest gaming console of all time, even if it did sound like a jet engine. But their exclusive games towards the end of its life cycle have got to be some of the best games of any console generation ever, and with the new consoles not being too far away, I hope that Sony look back at the PlayStation 4 and learn why people loved them so much.